What frustrates young voters in Canada, and why is the Conservative Party so scared to talk about culture? Check it out.
It's brutal out there. I mean, I work very hard. My wife and I have what we thought was a split middle income. We can't afford a home. Can we please be normal? Like, can we not cover our faces forever? Can we not take knees? Can we not focus on foreign issues and not domestic? There's a piece of the pie that you can go get by just being yourselves, by just being honest, by not compromising. It's such an important moment to, if we believe in common sense, if we believe in this normal that we keep harping on about, to become our own broadcasters, to give voice to those who deserve better. Normal shouldn't be counterculture, which shows you just how far astray we have gone here, where this works for a select few people, and congrats to them. It's been a hell of a Ponzi. You know, if the value of your house went up by 700,000% the last few years, I'm thrilled for you. I really am. But I'm in a shoebox. I work hard. The left and the right, they're in shoeboxes. They work hard. If I was born today, or let's say I was 22 right now instead of in my mid 30s, I'd be screwed. I can say that honestly. Like I think I would have just be spinning my wheels, and maybe I would have been going down some rabbit holes you don't want to go down to.
Concepts with Shawn Whatley.
Welcome to Concepts. My name is Shawn Whatley, and we have an exciting guest again today. Alexander Brown is a writer, a journalist, a managing editor, and co-founder of Without Diminishment, a new popular outlet on Substack. He's director of the National Citizens Coalition. He studied political science at Dalhousie University, and he is host of a show on JunoNews. He's also one of the originators behind Project Ontario. We had a fascinating discussion focused primarily on the things that Alex is involved with, starting with Without Diminishment. They have taken the bold move to put cultural discussions at the center of debate and discussion on Twitter and on social media. They have raised the salience of cultural discussions. They've challenged the primary assumption within conservative politics that the only safe thing to talk about is the economy. They're taking direct aim at that. Alex and his co-editors are subversive, but in a positive sense. They're not there to tear things down, but rather to build something new that people can look forward to. Once you lose all those things, you don't have a country. You have something different. And so that's where we're at right now. Some people would say we've already lost the country. I would argue that there's still an opportunity to save it. And there are many people out there, especially those 40s and under, who want to save the best of Canada and to build it and retain it, make it stronger for the future. Anyways, thanks again for dropping by. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe. I keep bugging you about it, but it actually makes a big difference. And now on with the show. Alex Brown, welcome.
Shawn, pleasure to be here. Former OMA president. I've got a few ailments for you to check out if you don't mind staying on the call.
Okay, we're gonna edit all that part out. No, we won't. Actually, when I had Tom Flanagan on, it was I think he was my first guest, and
that's quite a first guest.
And Tom said, "Oh, finally, I get to talk to a doctor." And I said, "Tom, you can't make me laugh. I smile too big." Anyways,
well, I'm in BC now, so imagine my wait list. So I've got a donk here. I've got a few things for you to check out. So.
Yeah, not good. Yeah, so at least you're not in a hospital bed talking to us. So that's good.
Exactly. Thanks. Yeah.
One of your claims to fame right now is being the managing director and co-founder of Without Diminishment, and it is really causing waves. So tell me about it. Why did you start it?
It is, and we're thrilled about that. And I think the real measure of success will be if those waves sort of get outside of our sphere a little bit, our terminally online political sphere. We saw there was this kind of gulf between the way I've always viewed it, because I work in third parties and in campaigns, between the yobs, to borrow from a coined slur of rural conservatives, and the policy wonks, the really bright guys like yourself who do incredible work in MLI. Who's writing culture? Who's bridging that gap? There's so many great opinion columnists out there. There's so many great places to send things, The Hub, etc. But instead of being potentially gate kept by the idea that you always sort of have to write conservatively from this economic framework, what if we steered into the kinds of ideas and conversations that have scared people for a few years? We're doing it respectfully. We're doing it in a housebroken manner. I'm wearing a jacket. We're not just the great unwashed, but there has been, I suppose, to me and to others, especially around my age as millennials and Gen Zs, that in a vacuum over the last few years, culturally, and being afraid to have these difficult conversations, we see what is born out of it. We see that in so many ways, politics is downstream from culture, and Canadian culture has kind of taken a decade plus off. And so the hope is if we venture upstream, if we build some safe harbors and defend some monuments of meaning, that come all these next panics, come the urgency of the moment right here for this country to start doing right by people, there'll be an easier defense. We'll have a better chance of, building pipelines, modernizing healthcare, fixing immigration, as opposed to these being topics where I think of the last few years even, and I'm rambling already, with well-meaning reconciliation sentiment that has already turned into a kind of industrial complex. And we're seeing these Cowichan decisions and folks now worried about the very land beneath their feet. We got to have these hard conversations right now, or this stuff is going to continue to spiral.
So it seems to me that Without Diminishment, especially this new Substack that you guys have started, is, I'm struggling for an analogy, playing off the song sheet or using a different songbook with intention. So instead of saying, we're going to focus on process, policy, procedure, economics, and just stick to a perceived, neutral, technocratic, elite kind of wonkish set of solutions, you're saying the people who are doing all that work actually have a whole bunch of presuppositions that they never talk about and
can't talk about them.
Yeah.
And I get it. And I'm lucky that I get to play in culture. It is an indulgence. I'm not a political consultant. I'm not beholden to a premier's office. I'm not beholden to a consultant firm. I can say these things. There's not a question of you're in conflict by saying XYZ or you're going to burn a client. We get to, myself, Jeff Russ, Caroline Elliott, none of us are running for office. I think Caroline should be premier of BC one day. There's no way around it. She's incredible. Jeff could be just incredible. He's a rising young star, and I bought stock in him before it was cool.
He's awesome.
Yeah, no, and so much of this is just in some ways his coming out party, which I'm thrilled to help enable because he's so talented and he's years younger than me, and he can sneeze and end up on the front page of a newspaper. But we can play in both worlds here, and that is an advantage where there are others who perhaps to not get kicked out of the Rosedale cocktail party or to not lose favor in Ottawa can't lean into the things that they want to lean into and speak the truths that they want to. And so we are lucky to get to do that, and it would be a waste if we didn't take advantage of it.
So you guys have already attracted some people who want to smack you down. And your most recent article that you published, actually written by Dr. Michael Bonner, and I'm just going to click over on my page here. You call it Against Andrew Coynism. And the first sentence here, I just thought, oh, Dr. Bonner, you're such a troublemaker. And he says this, quote, in their own minds, they invented rebellion. They stopped a war and they discovered sex. And he goes on. And it's just so irreverent. And I actually kind of feel a little bit bad for Andrew Coyne. If it weren't for the fact that Andrew Coyne talks and writes the same way, he's so dismissive. So tell me about this. And are you guys do you have a death wish or something? What do you do?
We don't care. Like I'm not incentivized to look the other way. I don't need an invite to a table of 6 at Terroni in the back room to talk about continuing the status quo. This is a kind of Laurentian character. And it's not that he's not talented. It's not that he's not a media staple. He's got really interesting lineage as the spawn of a former GBOC. I'm not good at looking the other way. Dr. Michael Bonner, who's incredibly astute and boasts and is a historian and an author, the fact that we can have this sort of high-class takedown, I really appreciate, because maybe if I was writing it, it would just come across like some blog. But there's this version of conservatism and stuffy conservatism or classical liberalism where you're not allowed to talk about these things. Mm-hmm. And I think about Coyne's role and behavior and men like him sort of symbolically in the Canadian legacy media chain, where reform is viewed as a threat now, where attitude is viewed as a threat, where it's just this tone policing of real issues. Like, we have a hyper majority of young people in our country, Shawn, who think that homeownership is now only for the rich. There are social contracts and pillars that are being torn up and ripped down left and right. We're still yobs. We're still the unwashed. We're still undesirable. There are all kinds of reasonable conservative points and parts of their platform that liberal-minded folks, media-minded folks, these sort of soft conservatives, red Tories, should be engaging with. But because of the tone, because people are upset, they're kind of angry, they won't interface with them. I'm sorry. We're not sorry.
Yeah. The fascinating thing is that Andrew Coyne really was the voice of traditional conservatism, whatever you want to call it, neoconservatism, neoliberalism, and especially when he was at National Post. I remember reading him for decades and my parents reading him. And then he's drifted, it appears that he's drifted, and he seems to have a dismissive, smug, condescending approach to all the people who haven't drifted with him.
Yeah.
And so I only mention his drift to say that I hope he's flexible enough and astute enough to say, hey, these guys at Without Diminishment are saying something good. Maybe it's time for me to adjust, shift gears again. So I say all this with hope. It's not within complete derision. I don't think anyone's a totally lost case, but I still thought you guys are a little stinkers. So good for you.
Shawn, we're in the social license business. It's in the Overton window business. If you work in culture, it's seeing what happened in a vacuum the last few years, the last decade plus. If you don't make these defenses, if you don't have a little attitude, if you don't boop entrenched interests in the nose, look where it gets us.
Yeah.
It's brutal out there. I mean, I work very hard. My wife and I have what we thought was a split middle income. We can't afford a home. We don't have family doctors. We love our country, but we see why those in our position, if they were offered an opportunity anywhere else, they would jump on it in a second. And we can choose to lie to ourselves about that, or we can admit that that's a real dynamic and try to make this better very quickly.
Yeah. So you mentioned economics a couple times. You talked about home ownership, and there was a tweet recently from Australia, a person running for an MP position, and she listed out her policy platform, which sounded like it came from a 1985 conservative flyer. And you guys have really tried to say, so that old way of packaging a political option, all in terms of economics, is not enough. How are you going to get people to realize that you aren't simply attacking economics because you hate economics? No, I get the sense that you actually like free enterprise and you like innovation. Yeah. And yet you're saying that's not enough, though. We need governments to actually have a position on things beyond that. Now, have I twisted what you're saying, or is that what I'm hearing?
No, and that tweet is hilarious, and I would encourage people to go look for it. Or it's not as if the young Australian men were charging at Gallipoli, thinking about these really tepid policy frameworks. Talk to young people.
Yeah.
You do. I'm young adjacent, less so every day. We're going to be speaking at UBC in a couple weeks, which is
Nice.
very kind of them to invite us. And they're, holy cow, like we think we're conservative or conservative minded. They are incredibly conservative. And they are on a precipice of arguably becoming too much so. There is a real anger and resentment out there. And if we can channel that in some way into being, into bringing over conservative policy and political voices and moving the polls and propping over the Overton window to include for the fact that there is a cultural problem in Canada, that we cannot austerity it away. I think of Chris Rufo came out to speak at an MLI event here in Vancouver recently, the sort of famous American conservative-oriented rebel rouser investigator who's worked with Ron DeSantis, journalist. And he told us on stage, and I think it was astutely put, that it's not that he likes big government. It's not that he doesn't want to return to these very sort of foundationally American libertarian ideals, but he also understands that you kind of have to beat your enemy. And I don't think liberals are our enemy, but you kind of need to beat your opponent at times with what they got. So work within the big government means. Don't just push austerity, or these lukewarm economic policies and pillars when you can talk culture, you can talk free speech, you can talk immigration reform, you can talk protecting and building historical monuments, you can talk the conditions of unrest and frustration, and you can really seek to defend and build things. And so when I look at economic principles and terrific policy papers, I love them. I think they have their place. We're not trying to take that place at Without Diminishment, but we want to make sure that there are other conversations also being had.
Yeah. And I like the way you described yourself. You said we're housebroken. We're trying to be thoughtful and not just thoughtful. You're trying to be normal. You're not trying to scare people away with this. And yet you're also tapping into this sense, especially amongst young people. And I've had, people Gen Z, especially, or younger millennials, people like yourself, who are saying the time for a calm, neutral proceduralism where we just chat around a boardroom table is gone. And so there is an awareness, but also a desire to fight a bit.
Yeah.
However, that can be scary too. And you alluded to that. You said,
reform.
Yeah. So talk about that risk that we face. If we don't have Without Diminishment, then that's going to leave the stage open to the people who really want to tear things down.
Yeah.
Or what are your thoughts on that?
No, and I agree. And I think that's part of the mindset and the equation with creating it. And we talked about it for a few months and finally put it into action and met with all kinds of fancy people. And we've had great support from gentlemen with, Orders of Canada. And so we're greatly appreciative of that. But I see and others see, and we're lying if we don't see it, that there is a groundswell of anger that goes beyond nativism, that there are certain groups that I have been castigated by who believe in, let's say, blanket calls for remigration. And that is where we're getting into the unhealthy zone, where it's that dog whistle is a foghorn, Shawn. And so I get it. I get they're mad. I get that they don't like me for even saying that. But I am a center-right human being from the 90s, the early 2000s. I haven't changed. We haven't gone crazy. We're not radicals. These are really inherently normal ideas and concerns. You talk to parents at the park. You talk to politicians off the record. Heck, you talk to the journalists who you thought were left-leaning, who cover the politicians off the record sometimes, and they feel the same way. They don't love crime. They don't see social cohesion anymore. They can't afford their homes. We're all saying these things. I'm in Vancouver right now, Shawn, and I'm in an area called Kitsilano, and it's very beautiful. There's lots of crunchy granola moms, and you would think it'd be very, very left-wing. But if you actually start talking to people, they're really upset. They're not even happy with their NDP. And so they might vote for them out of apathy, and apathy voting in Canada, particularly in Ontario of late, is a popular phenomenon. And we could certainly go into that if we have time. But no, it's in a vacuum, this gets worse. And I think it gets worse from the left and the right, because you have this permission for the coins and the carnies and the old guard and the Century Initiative crowd and all those, the Annex reading, or the Annex Toronto Star readers who wouldn't know sort of the desecration of their city because they just drive by it on the way to the cottage. It gets worse on that angle. And then on the right, potential trouble there. There's no way around it. I worry about those kids. I worry about what isolation, too much internet, lack of opportunity, being replaced by temporary foreign workers left and right. That we know where that goes. History is riddled with that lesson that isolated young men, so holy cow. Yeah. Now's the time to be normal.
No, exactly. Everything you're saying really speaks to why I started this whole podcast. Roger Scruton, and I've said this so many times. Anyways, he's a philosopher who passed away, a British philosopher, a very famous guy. And I don't agree with him on everything, but he did say a lot of really brilliant things. And one of the things he said is that conservatism is a work of rescue. And he also said, and I say this almost every podcast, my listeners are going to hate me for it, but he said that conservative intellectuals find reasons for people who don't need reasons. And so we are now engaged in this effort to come up with a story, with a set of reasons, an explanation for a different way to look at society and politics that is distinct from liberalism, classical liberalism, even libertarianism. And I love my classical liberal friends and my libertarian friends, but I think we've exhausted the resources of political liberalism. And so we need a way to describe, and I've been using the term a minimalist conservatism. That's not scary. It's not like asking the world of people, but it does articulate a different way to think about life, about society, about expectations. And it isn't scared to say, actually, we expect young people to find something that you love to do, find someone that you love to do it with, build a life together, get a home, start paying taxes. We want you to pay taxes. But to have these expectations and to say, that's not being weird or scary. That's just saying these are normal expectations. We don't want you to just simply go be free, do whatever you want. No, there are actually expectations. We want you to become a productive member of society. And these are the minimal things we want you to do. Now, is that super weird to say stuff like that? Or like, go ahead.
Maybe we become our parents. I don't know. We start to covet a kind of rule and order, but there hasn't been much the last few years. We had these summers, these fiery but mostly peaceful summers, Shawn. Heck, in Ontario, under a 3-term conservative majority, provincially, Sir John A. Macdonald was boarded up for 5 years. 5 years. Already a terrible thing, but that was 2 to 3 years longer than other statues across Canada. Maybe we need a little bit of tough love. And maybe in the absence of, that is what we end up craving. The grass looks greener. I think young people want order. I think if you're the age of raising children, I think if you haven't retired yet, I think you're looking around going, I worry about social degradation. I worry about the absence of what I view as societal cohesion or checks and balances. We had a guy out back our apartment the other day in the alley, like just committing crime. He was like, he clearly had all these stolen goods, and he was taking them with this saw, opening them up and like moving hard drives between bags. I called the police. They're very nice. They're doing their best. They showed up 25 minutes later and he was long gone. It's like it didn't really matter because it was just this accepted form of entropy. Entropy societally really starts to wear on you. I think of those COVID years where we lost the plot, where it started with let's all be safe and then ended in just political and cultural upheaval and complete nonsense. And it just, can we please be normal? Like, can we not cover our faces forever? Can we not take knees? Can we not focus on foreign issues and not domestic? Can we not offer the ladder to our future generations instead of pulling it up and throwing down a hand grenade, to borrow from a great Tristan Hopper tweet? normal, Shawn. This stuff is normal.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of the craziness that's been going on in Toronto, the point I think when I completely lost my mind just recently is when I saw an ambulance that was en route to pick up a child who was in needed medical attention.
The protest was blocking Young and Bloor.
Yeah, and they had to turn around. I like, you've crossed the line.
Foreign protest.
I do not support you at all. You are wrong. Your approach sucks. And so that was my gut reaction. And then that also scared me. I thought, oh, gee, if that's my gut reaction.
What's when you gaze long into the abyss gazes back? It's the coin thing. Every single flag in his bio, and folks, you don't have to put flags in your bios, you're adults, is foreign. There are other flags but Canadian, and yet his job seemingly is to gatekeep Canadian issues that we're allowed to talk about.
Yeah.
Add the Canadian flag first, and then maybe I'll take a little bit criticism here.
Yeah. So the reason I mentioned the ambulance, you mentioned a crime, and you also mentioned 3 majority governments in Ontario. One of the other things that you and I both were involved, you were much more involved. I just contributed an article and was honored to be part of that work. But I'm speaking about Project Ontario. So I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit and what vibe was at that event.
The vibe was terrific. I think I was the only person that got heckled, which I think that says something about me, but maybe the young man was given instructions by an aggrieved consultant at Queen's Park. I don't know. But it's a combined effort from all kinds of luminaries, far more esteemed actual luminaries than myself. It's the major conservative third parties that I was really lucky to be on stage with Matt and Chris Spoke and Ginny Roth and Brian Dykema. And Brian, too, is just such a pillar of conservative thought. And the fact that he's been sort of flippantly branded as some radical Yahoo is, to anyone who knows him, is beyond hilarious and frankly offensive. But we've been watching the last few years and just going, hey, what is being pitched as incrementalism, as safe by Ontario modern liberal standards, is looking a whole lot like decline unless you work for the government or maybe benefit from the Skills Development Fund. And so folks have come together. My organization, the National Citizens Coalition, is one of them. Matt Spoke, who works with Canada Strong and Free and is a house builder, has done such a great job organizing this. Top strategists like Ginny Roth, the Adam Zivo, Josh DeHaas from the Canada Constitution Foundation, yourself. And we're just putting ideas out there. We're putting policy ideas out there saying, hey, this isn't working. Maybe this could be a little bit more conservative. And it has been met with derision from Queen's Park. It has been met with all kinds of creative adjectives. I've never been called what I've been called by the Premier of Ontario. And I drive TrueAnon crazy for a living. And so that has been tremendously disappointing. I appreciate that they are protecting their position, but is it, look, winning first and foremost, very important. Ian Brody just tweeted something like that. Ian's obviously as bright as it gets, but is Ontario winning? You have net migration for the first time, and that is not just its record amount of temporary foreign workers and foreign students. That's just families giving up. That's enterprising young people going, I'm going to go to Alberta or I'm going to go to the States. I'll take a visa in Mexico where I think I might be able to build something and afford something, and I might get more timely health care, and I could probably get a surgery, in a couple weeks if something bad happened, God forbid. And so I remember being up on stage talking about Mike Harris with Ginny at this event, and the room was warm and jovial, and we all had a nice time, and we were thrilled to have you there. And I wish I had time to say, I look around at all of you, and I see people from major campaigns. I see people, MPs, MPPs, great candidates, the legacy conservative organizations. We didn't all come together to suddenly be liberals. We didn't cut some backroom deal. Those backroom deals are being cut in Queen's Park. We just want you to be a bit more normal, to go back to normal, what we've been talking about. This incrementalism in this day and age is decline. We see it in our GDP per capita. We see it in our housing starts. We see it in just the pathway we're offering to young and working people. We see it in our healthcare wait times and backlogs. you got to sometimes not just exist within the polling margin of error to play it safe. You got to unbox, your founding prime minister. You have to take on some of the school boards and offer better choice. You have to open up to private surgeries more willingly. You have to create the conditions for true economic growth and not just hand out subsidies to ice cream companies and threaten businesses that are perhaps already planning and were already planning to leave Ontario because the conditions in Ontario economically make no sense. You shouldn't be defending EV subsidies you never should have handed out in the first place, to the detriment of our great canola farmers in Saskatchewan. And so, room full of normal people, they're under pretenses of nothing but good faith, just completely besmirched. And, we laughed about it and we held it anyway, and it was a terrific success. And I think Project Ontario is just going to keep growing from there.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and kudos to all of you for making that happen. I was interviewed on CBC about Project Ontario, and they were just zeroing in on, you guys are calling for private surgery and tearing down the public healthcare system. And they tried every possible way to make us sound like the right-wing yahoos that Doug Ford called us. And the interviewer, the host, whatever I call them, she eventually gave up and she said, yeah, well, I guess everything you're saying is, it's not very scary at all.
No, when Matt goes on media too, he immediately disarms them. Colin DeMello, to his credit, has reported well. Trillium, their reporting has been very good.
Yeah.
It's just, they're not this.
Yeah.
So how are we the boogeyman? How has there been this Darvo technique from the Ford government, this like deny, attack, reverse, victimize, other? Which is what, like cluster B abusers do to their victims. We just want to pull you back a little bit for the love of all that is good.
Yeah. No, it was brilliant. And I liked your comment too about the focus on winning. So you hear this a lot in conservative retail politics, that the first job is to win. And I agree with it. I understand why people say that.
Yeah.
And to win, does that mean you just abandon every other good idea you've ever had or hide it? I think that actually makes the voters suspicious. You're better off to come out, and I don't usually give a shout out to Brian Mulrooney because I actually think he was a little too wet for my taste. But the great example that I always use from his campaign is the issue of free trade. And I believe in good trade deals. I'm not a free trade ideologue, and maybe that gets me kicked out of Camp Conservative just saying that. But he, at the time, had to convince the Canadian public that free trade was something worth pursuing. And at that time, I think it probably was. We got a lot of economic good that came out of the free trade agreement after that. But my point is that the concept of free trade wasn't popular, and he had to work and work to try to market, sell, explain, convince people that this is something we're supporting. I think we need more of that. That's leadership. That's going out and saying, here's my idea. Let's talk about it. Let's discuss why this is something worth talking about. But I don't see that, especially from Doug Ford. And I've been loath to criticize him because it's so rare that we get a conservative government in Ontario these days. But the last couple of years, I'm just going, Premier Ford, where is your head? These are not conservative ideas. And that, $500 million, I believe, he just invested in DEI education.
Yeah.
And I thought, come on, man, you're begging me to come and attack you. And so this core pillar of Conservatism Inc., if we can call it that, hopefully that's not too derogatory, but the core pillar of winning at all costs, I disagree with that. And now Andrew Coyne would say, well, then you're going to be a third party forever. But what are your thoughts on this win at all costs mantra within conservatism?
It's hollow. I wish the results spoke for themselves. Of late, they don't. The province of Ontario is not in a good place. Mm-hmm. Alberta is increasingly the outlier. Saskatchewan, slightly smaller scale economically, but there has to be something more to it. The rubber needs to meet the road. In the case of Ontario, the polling winds are increasingly and just always very strong. They are favorable. I can appreciate that you can't just poll percentage points. Well, we're at 50% today. So what if we took 3% away by opening up school choice? But if not now, when? If this isn't the opportunity to do something more meaningfully conservative, no one has been suggesting the sort of Tim Hudak approach of, I'm going to campaign on firing 100,000 public sector workers. Aside, I was in Queen's Park the day after that announcement happened. I walked in for an interview. I was in my 20s. I didn't know my you-know-what from my elbow. I would have been a completely useless member of that team in any capacity. I was interviewed by the consultant who came up with that idea, who I believe had come up from Kentucky had worked with the Pauls. And he was gone the next day. So suffice to say, I was never called back for that position, because that is an example of just when, what the heck, not a great idea, even if a version of austerity would have been helpful there. I can appreciate that they even view in Ontario the common sense revolution as somewhat salting the earth for a decade plus to come and planting the seeds. I guess not in that garden because the earth was salted, but for Wynne and McGuinty and a really difficult 15 years. Yeah. But you can strike a balance. It's sitting right there. Yeah. And so that to me is, win at all costs would be terrific, but they are, these actual conservatives and actual conservative governments aren't winning at all cost anyway. The O'Toole approach did not work. The Poilievre, I think what is incredibly unique about our last federal election was the fact that the party that lowered our flag for a few years was suddenly just gifted the immense black swan good luck of being able to rally around it. And so there's a piece of the pie that you can go get by just being yourselves, by just being honest, by not compromising. I even think that the conservatives, they were flat-footed for so many reasons, with elbows up and undeniably causing just a massive problem for our election and interfering in Australia's too. Just leave the Commonwealth alone, please. But all of a sudden that we're hardcore against this, it struck me as dishonest. And I think that because they had to kind of outflank the Liberals, and now they're even still saying, well, actually, I don't think we should be striking a deal. It's like, no, we probably should. We're getting destroyed here. Yeah. So just be yourself, like run your race, like listen to the Ian Brodies, who are terrific, take criticism, but what does victory mean when the only shining example right now, the case that's being made is Ontario, and we all know that is not a conservative government, and we all know that is not a healthy environment. We all know that is a government that is run primarily by a sort of great wall of consultancy. Yeah. And you kind of have to know somebody to get anything done. I know folks in Queen's Park who behind the scenes during the COVID years, the last few years, they're really good people. They're actually conservative. There's some great staffers there too, but they can't do anything because they're boxed out. They're boxed out. And so that doesn't sound like or look like winning at all to me, Shawn.
Yeah. Yeah. Couple thoughts come to mind when you say they're boxed out. One of the challenges in every right of center movement is that right of center includes a ton of different ideas. And so it seems like the people who are good at governing and being in power end up ruling with more of a strong fist than our libertarian instincts would like. But anyways, I want to get to the National Citizens Coalition. We're not going to go there yet. You've mentioned Mike Harris at least once, and I think you said common sense at one point too. Yep. And so this is me trying to influence Alex's brain, because I know you live and move in these circles, and we often hold Mike Harris up as the savior of Ontario. He's a true conservative, and many things about him are truly conservative, and there are many things about him that I really like. But
I was waiting for that.
That's right. However, I would encourage people just to read the chapter written by Will Falk in the recent book about Harris I believe it's called The Harris Legacy. I think it's called The Legacy, but it's just out a few years ago. And many of the chapters are written by people you would recognize, but this one chapter is written by Will Fault. And I've talked with Will about this. Will is, I would say, left of center, liberal, maybe slightly right-leaning liberal, but very much the liberal brand. And he's a longtime consultant, one of the big consulting firms in Toronto, international consulting firm. And his thing was healthcare. And so his whole chapter, is just so delicious. He praises Mike Harris for being a master central planner. He said he took central planning to heights unseen by any Liberal or NDP government. He slashed and reorganized and moved services he tore them out of one community and put them in another community. And he gives example after example after example. And it was painful, but I was just like, yes, Will, just keep punching. And I said, finally, someone is calling out the Mike Harris legacy on healthcare as being 100% anti-conservative.
Right.
And now, what does it mean by 100% anti-conservative? The only thing he did that made conservatives happy was that he slashed spending.
Yeah.
Well, that is not the definition. That was the definition of conservatism perhaps in the 1980s. But he was a master central planner. In fact, his DM of health was a former employee with the Romano government. And that's where he came up. He came up through the NDP. And that's why they were so good at central planning and cutting and just taking charge and redesigning. And so this is my speech, my sermon to try to influence Alex. Please, whatever you do, if Mike Harris comes up, at least go read that chapter. At least be aware that, yes, okay, he did some good things, but on healthcare, I fundamentally disagree with him. I think he was a socialist extreme. So I'm going to stop there. I don't know if I've offended you.
No, if I'm ever allowed back up on stage for Project Ontario, I'll draw a clear line there where, we're against centrally planned economies,
Yes.
And Mike is, a roadmap to success on so many things, but
healthcare.
because as we know, centrally planned Ontario, that's what leads to, pouring out Crown Royal. And I'm pretty sure the Premier of Ontario is about to set a Jeep on fire. Like it can't be ruled out, right? And so it's very Eastern Bloc behavior.
Yes, Eastern Bloc behavior. I love it. Okay, so let's pivot now to the National Citizens Coalition, an august institution. I think you said your grandfather founded it, and we've had, Prime Minister Stephen Harper was you're in his chair now. He was a director for a while, I believe. Tell us about it.
It is Canada's founding conservative, sort of small c, little guy advocacy group. Under Trudeau the senior, he took out a newspaper ad in the Globe and Mail saying, "If you share my alarm, your support is welcome," because he was noticing wartime spending when we weren't at war, and that was a harbinger of things to come. And little did he know, how much worse that would get, and how badly we'd lose our way, and that there would be a Trudeau the Junior who would seek to all but finish us off as a productive economy, practically dead last in the OECD on productivity. And so it has long been a bulwark for the small c conservative, and I'm very proud of that role, because the small c conservatives are allowed to criticize the big C's or the capital C's who aren't acting like C's. And so when groups like the NCC come together to support Project Ontario, when you take out election ads as a third-party advertiser, when you publish calls to action in terrific writing and you reach millions of people per month, as I'm proud to do, you do lots of media engagements, you get to be yourself again. I get to live in this indulgence of culture, because I don't want to run for office. I don't think I could win. I've got some bad tweets, Shawn. I'm too punchy. I have a sense of humor. I'm still a child at heart. I would get, I'd insult Andrew Coyne, third day on the campaign trail, there comes the hit piece. And so it's just, as with Without Diminishment, in a vacuum, you worry about these matters. You worry about counter-signaling media and counter-signaling entrenched interests that don't have your best interest at heart. Canada is made up of massive lobby groups and efforts, and even the business lobby is losing its way in many ways. And as a conservative, that is a unique thing to say, because the business lobby is back right now before we attempt to put together a fixed immigration plan, being like, no, 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 no. We want infinite, cheap, suppressed, exploitable labor, a practice that has been condemned by the United Nations, specifically for Canada, saying that this is kind of like a slave labor thing you guys are doing. And so you have to go, I'm sorry, but, and that's very much part of the role, whether it is holding liberals to account or conservatives who lose their way. You get to speak on behalf of your people and for those who deserve better, and you don't have to put the capital C in front of it. So you can be not flexible in principles, but flexible in your target. And it is increasingly valuable. And the role of independent media now, the role of these groups, we see just the numbers alone, engagements-wise, you reach a staggering amount of people now. You can be your own broadcaster, as you are right now on this podcast. You can cut out the middleman. You didn't have to go to CBC for permission to talk to me today, and they would have said no. CBC Gem right now is going to court to not release its subscriber numbers, which tells you, and knowing that it is entirely subsidized as a service, that it is a really bad number. Like I joked that it might be in the 3 figures on Twitter, but 4 or 5 would be really low. Yeah. Whereas it's such an important moment to, if we believe in common sense, if we believe in this normal that we keep harping on about, to become our own broadcasters, to give voice to those who deserve better. Many of them are conservative, but many of them are just the apolitical little guy. I worry about the apolitical little guy just as much as I worry about the how fertile the ground is for conservative thought. We just want this to be better. And I think the coalition, as a long time grassroots organization, maybe that's the way to put it. It's just grassroots. And we know that, our entrenched interests have lost their way. And so, start small, dream big.
Yeah. So second last question. You mentioned that with NCC, you're able to call out business.
Yeah.
And that made me think of your earlier comment about Kitsilano Beach. We had friends who lived in Kitsilano in the 1990s. And to your point, it was like Hippieville, right? People were smoking pot before pot was something you were allowed to smoke everywhere. And so very strongly, not just center left, but left. And my kids, so all my kids are in their 20s, and my kids are saying, Dad, there seems to be a lot of people who still identify as NDP voters, or even calling themselves socialists, who have a lot of the ideas and positions that you're talking about. And so I wonder, in your travels, whether you're seeing that, whether there isn't. Now, I don't want to just talk about the U theory and how one end of the spectrum ends up meeting the other. I think that oversimplifies things. I'm wondering rather whether or not you're seeing an innate desire or an appetite for people who just want to live lives. They just want to. We use home ownership as the example, but it's not just home ownership. It's about having a home and living lives that they think are worth living, doing what they think is honorable and purposeful and meaningful, and doing things that are cool and beautiful, and doing, like the word you used is just being normal, living normal lives. Do you see that across the political spectrum now? Do you see that in your formerly leftist Kitsilano Beach neighbors?
I do, and I see it in my leftist friends who I don't care that they're leftist. I've never needed anyone to pass a purity test. There's a kind of counterculture thing going on here now where there's this unique demographic that's forming in some regards, and let's say like the Canadian like under 40s, which is you kind of have this conservative social democrat at the moment where like the Poilievre camp can actually go get them too. Like young people, like the student vote they won for the first time. It's just the conditions of growth are so bad that you almost start sounding spiritually NDP when you're like, raging against, the man. But the man is not the traditional man. It's not the man that's been good for you. There isn't law and order anymore. There is not a free market economy in the truest sense. Like, you can't afford the white picket fence. And so the left and the right, it's not just like a horseshoe theory thing. It's like they can actually come together on these key issues. And I think that's really exciting. But the flip side is that normal shouldn't be counterculture, which shows you just how far astray we have gone here, where this works for a select few people, and congrats to them. I get it. It's been a hell of a Ponzi. If the value of your house went up by 700,000% the last few years, I'm thrilled for you. I really am. But I'm in a shoebox. I work hard. The left and the right, they're in shoeboxes. They work hard. And so I think part of what we're doing at Without Diminishment is you're kind of diagnosing that, and you're kind of speaking to it, where it's this really unique phenomenon. And I see why that scares people. And I understand that part of the tone policing that some in conservative circles or in maybe more legacy conservative media have offered to Pierre is that he kind of rattles people like that. That when you have a kind of tone, a disturbed tone, when you're particularly punchy, you almost are coming across as spiritually NDP. You're coming across as some Trotskyist, and they're worried that you're going to hop on the ramparts and set their house ablaze. That's not the intention whatsoever. And so these are really unique sort of demographic wins and to tap into here, to follow along. And so we're just trying to diagnose that, speak to it, have people be heard, appreciate that this doesn't work for a wide spread of people in Canada right now. And I think that we can find common ground, which is ideally a good thing, between the left and the right and the center, to admit and to know that this hasn't worked. And so let's come together on some normal stuff here.
Yeah, no, that was beautiful. Step into the mic. So I agree with you. There's that issue too of revolution, right? Conservatives traditionally are the party of the anti-revolution.
Yeah.
We don't want to be anarchists, but then you get to a point of looking around and saying, well, what are we trying to conserve? So I think our job actually is more to rediscover a way to live a normal life. But anyways, I said one more question. This is my last question.
One more, sure.
I ask everybody the same question. What have I not asked you that I should be asking you about, or what's bothering you, whether it's censorship or technocracy or losing touch with what it means to be human? What's keeping you awake at night besides your newborn? I don't know if you have kids or not, but what keeps you awake?
Would be blessed to have them. What's keeping me awake at night, and sort of, it's kind of my beat at this point, and we've touched on it, is just the conditions for young people. I have no issues speaking honestly about how I see my experience with almost failing to launch. I bounced around jobs. I, did a little bit of navel gazing in my 20s. I sort of resisted politics and then came back to it, and finally decided, just whole ass this thing and don't have it both ways. Put yourself in front of a camera, do walk and talks, write more op-eds, build. And that took time. That took getting over myself a little bit. That took creating opportunities. And to think of those on the launch pad now who are not receiving opportunities, who just see, their 200, 300 resumes just sitting in the bin. I worry so much about idle hands as the sort of devil's plaything. I worry about the conditions for alienation and where that goes. I don't want it to be unproductive. I don't want blanket sentiments against our valued immigrants and our diaspora. We can have one hell of a melting pot when this all makes sense. Like 2014 Canada would work right now. And so, and we can't hope for better. Anyone who thinks so is probably kidding themselves and is a bit too much of an idealist. And so I want to get out ahead of that. because in so many ways the damage has been done, but it's like this gets so much worse. And so I'm thrilled to get to talk to young people more so. We have a ton of young readers who have reached out to the Without Diminishment team saying, I've been waiting for something like this. I'm in university. It's a very alienating time. And I'm greatly appreciative of that, because I think of the work Jamil Javani is doing as well, sort of going around to campuses. And this is a moment to make sure that folks feel heard and that they're not ignored, because early signs from the federal government, from a province like Ontario, is that young people are still not a priority.
Yeah.
And they're not going to have kids if they don't have the conditions for growth or success. They're not going to be mentally healthy if they don't have the conditions for growth or success. They're not going to be physically healthy if they don't have doctors and the conditions to cultivate their health and success. There are so many things we have to fix, and I have concerns for everyone across the spectrum, young or old, but in particular, it's an everyday thing, which is that I barely launched, Shawn, barely. And I'm like really thrilled to get to talk to you and to get to stand on the shoulders of giants and people far brighter than myself. But if I was born today, or let's say I was 22 right now instead of in my mid 30s, I'd be screwed. I can say that honestly. Like I think I would have just be spinning my wheels, and maybe I would have been going down some rabbit holes you don't want to go down to, where not a lot of light gets in and nothing grows. And so for me, if we care about growth, if we care about conservative values, if we care about free enterprise and unlocking potential, it starts and ends with young people. And I want to see more leadership on that from left, right, center, everybody.
Brilliant. Yeah. Alex Brown, writer, journalist, managing editor, and co-founder Without Diminishment, director of NCC, host at JunoNews, and key organizer, I'd say co-founder, major supporter, I don't know what title to give you, for Project Ontario. Lots of places. We'll have a ton of links in the show notes. Thanks so much for taking the time today, Alex.
Shawn, this was a real pleasure. I admire your work greatly.
Talk soon.